Morning.
Hello, Cristo.
So, look, we've spent a lot of time talking about it this morning, but I feel that we should just round off the debate about the assisted dying bill. I'm not sure if you heard both of the guests that we just had on about that. Really compelling arguments from Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Romaine saying, look, this bill is about someone who is terminally ill. It is very similar to what they're doing in Oregon in the United States, where, there are many, many safeguards in place. You have to be terminally ill already. This is not assisted suicide. It is ending your death early. Michael Phillips, though, lawyer at Christian Concern, saying, well, actually, this is how all legislation starts. There's always a mission creep. You always start with perhaps something that sounds reasonable, but it ends up that we could end up like some of these countries like the Netherlands or various others, where you end up being able to have a state-sanctioned end of your life because you've got a mental health problem or because you've got a medical condition that is unpleasant. Mike, where do you stand on this?
I mean, it hasn't become law yet. MPs voted for its second reading, which is very difficult to get a bill past that stage. It's a backbench bill, it's not a government bill. So the campaigners, the movement Kim led by, to have won an extraordinary victory for their side of the argument here. But if you look at the votes, Cristo, it's not even split across party lines. I mean, around half of Labour MPs backed it, 150 voted against. The Conservatives also split, Lib Dems split. The only party that backed it in its entirety were the Greens.
So there are only four of them, right?
And there's only four, and it's the Reform split 3-2. Nigel Farage voting against. It's fascinating to see how it divides people.
Well, this is the interesting thing. If you look at it, it speaks to the ideological divides within the parties. So if you look at the Conservatives, it's split along libertarian and socially conservative lines, and on the Labor Party, it's split along progressives and old school socialists. And so it'll be interesting to see how those different strands ascend or in the coming...
Which is which, though, out of those?
So, for example, I'm on the right of politics, I'm a libertarian, and I support this measure. I come from that old belief that you should be allowed to do what you want to do
and
to the
nothing
extent it doesn't hurt other people. And it's nothing to do with the state. And I think this is refreshing, right? Because we live in an age and in a country where our rights are being slowly chipped away at by the state day by day by day, and this is a very rare moment where the state has actually said we're going to take a step back. It actually flies in the face of so many other instances in society today.
Although the state are taking a step back, and I actually agree with the ideological principles that you just outlined, the state are still involved in so much as the safeguards and the administration of that via a judge and via doctors and via the NHS. That is the state being involved. And we've seen many examples when it comes to do not resuscitate, when we've seen end-of-life care, where we've seen people who are going into hospitals or doctors to get better, where the state has utterly screwed up. So isn't that a massive concern, that although ideologically the state aren't involved, when it comes to the practice, the state has a great reputation, or should I say bad reputation, for screwing it up monumentally?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Of course, it's going to be a concern, and this isn't going to be absolutely perfect. But the fact is, if there wasn't some level of safeguards in place, there wouldn't be public trust in this particular policy.
But the state is really bad sometimes at some of those safeguards.
Well, the split is fascinating. So if you look at the polling done by More in Common on this, 3/4 of people said that they wanted the government or the NHS to have some sort of role in delivering it if it was passed. That was across the spectrum. But the same proportion of people said they didn't think the NHS was fit for purpose. And this really provokes, quite a difficult thing in terms of how it might be implemented, because you have a health secretary who's against it. You have an NHS that's currently struggling with resources.
And a justice secretary against it.
Yes, I mean, it's going to be a very tricky thing to do. And the government's trying to reform the NHS at the same time. But it just highlights how people expect the state to get out of the way, but also enable their choices as well. And that's a very different thing to what's happened, say, in Australia, where it's largely a private provision in that sense too. We're probably the most state-involved country implementing this measure, and it's going to be very difficult to get it right, I would say, Cristo.
And this is the big concern I have, because I ideologically agree with it, but I have absolutely no faith in our politicians or our public services to deliver it in a way that won't absolutely screw it up. And that's... you could repeat that probably on most issues that I believe in, but this is death. It's a really important issue.
I mean, at the moment, this highlights, I think, the fact that although the NHS was created with the idea of cradle to grave, actually end-of-life care has fallen behind. I think that
do you support this?
Look, I don't take a view one way or the other because I actually work in healthcare.
Get off the fence.
So I'm going to say, look, I think it's far too complicated. I've heard compelling arguments.
Because I've had people who've worked in healthcare that have messaged this morning who have a definitive view. One person who works in healthcare saying I'm against it. One person
it's not worth me taking a definitive view for or against. But I think what concerns me is how it will be implemented if it passes, because at the moment it's got to go through a very lengthy procedure, and this bill is mainly concerned with how the process will work. The safeguarding.
But it's only given 5 hours yesterday.
It will have about 16 to 20 hours maybe in committee, 40 hours in committee in the spring. It might become law within a year, implemented by 2027, 2028 at most. But it won't. There needs to be a whole separate piece of work done by the Department for Health, done by the government, done by a health secretary who doesn't believe in it, in order to make it work. And that's going to be a hard thing for West Streeting to do, I think. And the real question is he going to be comfortable doing this? Will Keir Starmer have another cabinet resignation in 6 months' time over this?
But then this is one of those occasions where actually I think that maybe there is some validity to him not believing in it, because that means that he will be belt and braces.
I hope so,
Do you know what I mean? I hope that he is able to say, right, I don't believe in this, so therefore I've got to make sure that in order for this to go through, there are those absolute extra protections so that I can live with myself with this happening.
And I think Kim Ledbetter has made it clear that she wants to strengthen the bill. And look, I don't think Parliament will pass a bill that they're not happy with. And we don't know how the bill can still be amended by MPs. MPs might vote it down. It can then be extensively amended by the House of Lords. I don't think this is going to be rushed through the parliamentary process, mainly because it doesn't have government time. The government will be involved, but they're not backing the bill unequivocally, which is unusual for them with private members' bills. A lot of times they do pick it up, even though the Prime Minister is in favour. We have to remember about 2/3 of the Cabinet supported it, a third voted against. This is going to be genuinely a very interesting legal process, parliamentary process debate for this becoming law. But it does put a lot of pressure on the MPs that are pushing this through.
It's really interesting as well that some of the messages that I've got as a result of the debate before, both of you, think of the worst pain you've ever suffered in your life, says Gary, however fleeting that may have been, and then imagine having to spend your final days, your final months, or even having to live with years in that pain, unable to end your own life with nobody else able to legally end it for you. What right does the state or religious zealots like Michael Phillips, our guest at the start of this hour, have to say that you must live like that? If the state or an individual were inflicting that degree of pain on you, a court would deem that to be a crime. I don't see how preventing you from ending that suffering yourself is any different. It's a crime, so the law needs to change. And Sean says it's such an individual issue. I'm extremely torn as to what is the correct answer. Is it not cruel to keep someone alive if they're nearing the end of their life and suffering terribly? We don't allow our pets and animals to suffer. That's considered humane. However, will there be people that take advantage of this rule for their own selfish gain? Absolutely. I really don't think I trust politicians to make this decision. They're not qualified and have proved time and again they only do things for political reasons. It's foolish to think that doctors don't do a form of this already in palliative care, knowing the amount of drugs administered for pain relief will eventually kill that person, says Sean. Or, of course, withdrawing sort of, food and water sometimes. I mean, we've seen that before, where that sort of ends up being a horrible death, but it is a way in which someone's life ends up ending. Now, we saw this week, it would have been discussed endlessly, I'm sure, but it is such a massive story, and that is the immigration figures and the fact that we have seen record figures once again. Keir Starmer has vowed graft, not gimmicks, to drive down net migration, 906,000 in the year up to June 2023. Positive or negative effect on the United Kingdom? I'll start with you, Will Kingston.
It is an existential threat to the United Kingdom.
Am I detecting an accent there?
It is an Australian accent, and that is relevant to this conversation because
Why?
Because Australia is, well, we've got to break this down into legal migration and illegal migration. Australia is one of the few countries that actually got illegal migration under control when they were in a very similar position to the UK in the early 2010s. We had an illegal boats crisis in that period, and what you need is to have a government with the guts to actually A, turn back boats, and B, embrace offshore processing. It requires political will, and it's a political will which I don't think this Labor Party has.
Why did you come to the UK?
Because I have an enduring faith in this country's values, in this country's history, in this country's culture. And I think all of those things are under threat by unchecked mass migration.
Yes, however, the figures for the illegal migration, for people who come over on small boats and stuff, usually make up about sort of 3% of the legal migration figures. They're always massively, much higher. There will be people watching along today saying, well, hang on, this fella who is saying that migration is a massive threat to the United Kingdom, and of course there are many arguments about infrastructure and number of people and all those things, what are you doing here?
Yeah, two responses. Number one, I contribute to the economy in the way that most migrants don't. Number two, I embrace this country's history and its values in a way that many migrants don't. This is not about whether or not migration is a good or a bad thing. It's about how much migration you have, it's about how quickly you have it, and it's about where people are coming from. I come from a country which shares the values of the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, we are bringing too many people into this country that don't share our values, that don't share our belief in Western liberal democracy, and you are seeing the cultural cohesion fray at the seams as a result of that. That's how we need to frame this debate. Unfortunately, too many people are scared to say that we should be bringing in people who will contribute and who believe what we believe. Instead...
Mike, are you one of those people? Do you think that we should...
I have to confess, although I have an English accent, I have a very international background. I've got a French great-grandfather, I've got a family in America, in Australia as well. So, you know, in terms of, like, in that sense, I am a product of different waves of migration into this country. The figures are, quite frankly, astonishing, and I think it does put pressure on Keir Starmer. I mean, look, just to say, if you've doubt Will's pages, his phone background is Winston Churchill. I can see it from here as well. The man's probably more patriotic than I am, but for me, I think this underlines the fact that the record figures were partly contributed by certain schemes for Hong Kong, Ukraine coming in as well. Hopefully, if Donald Trump brings back his promise to resolve the war there, we'll see the figures drop off. They fell by 200,000 for 2023-2024 to June. That could still be revised up or down.
But that's still 728,000.
And we also have to question if these figures are entirely correct. You know, they may be under-reporting as well. There may be more than that. And
if anything, they're higher.
And people probably are not coming asymmetrically into the same parts of the country.
Is it a good thing that that many people have come here? Is it a good thing that so many people
I think it depends on what they're contributing as well to the country. And look, I live in London. I'm a very big advocate of a diverse and cosmopolitan city. I think it's one of the main reasons why I live here. I've been a supporter of, migration most of my life, but we have to acknowledge that more and more people feel concerned about the levels coming in, and it's certainly becoming fuel for people on the far right. Immigration is consistently cited as a consistent concern.
But isn't that the fault of your side, with respect? Because any time that anyone who has been moderate that has brought up immigration has always been, not by you particularly, maybe, but the left particularly... Let me just finish. Will say, someone who has brought up immigration, oh, you are far right. And what that has meant is that those people with moderate concerns are then drawn to the far right because they're the only people who seemingly are saying what needs to be said.
I won't defend the position of the Labour Party on immigration. Lone people say that the unchecked migration began under Tony Blair. Gordon Brown was ridiculed for his British jobs for British workers point. Ed Miliband famously carved an immigration pledge into a giant stone. Jeremy Corbyn was ambiguous on it. Keir Starmer is now caught in a position where he represents a very cosmopolitan North London seat, but he also knows that his Home Secretary comes from a Red Wall seat, and she will have a very different view on this. And again, I think this highlights the fact that Labour has now stretched itself very thin across the country, and how they reconcile these North London views versus the views of a lot of their traditional voter base, which is probably one of the reasons why Starmer didn't pick up a lot of the votes in the election, is going to be fascinating. Right. We need a root and branch view of our whole immigration policy.
All right, a question for you. One of the big things that is about immigration, whether you're left or right, whether you are pro or anti, is infrastructure. And I think if you are someone in one of those red wall seats, if you're someone who probably voted for Brexit, you are not someone who is going to look at contributions made by immigrants. You're going to look at GDP figures. You're going to say, I cannot get a doctor's appointment, I cannot get a hospital appointment. Doesn't that mean that again, someone like yourself, lovely fellow, really nice to see you here, coming here and putting on a strain on infrastructure, people aren't going to listen and go, my God, but that lovely Will, he's a great contributor, he pays his taxes and he's got British culture. They're going to think someone like Will, legal, great guy, is still going to be taking a doctor or a hospital appointment that I could be having.
Yeah, they'd be wrong. Because Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, because migration isn't the problem. We should still have some number of migration, but again, it's the people that we are choosing to allow in, and it's the volume of it. Now, without wanting to blow my own trumpet, I think I'm a net contributor to this country. I think I'm a good type of person that you want to have in this country.
What type of people are we bringing in that aren't that?
At the moment, the majority of people that we bring into this country are net detractors. They take out more money from the economy than they put in. So number one, you want skilled migration. You want people who are going to actually be working in, skilled labour that earn on income that aren't going to be taking welfare benefits, which at the moment a huge proportion of migrants do.
I thought the latest figures, though, showed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that migration, and again, this is GDP, and I think GDP is something that someone who can't get a doctor's appointment probably wouldn't care about, but I thought there was sort of a £6 billion benefit in tax to the UK as a result of migration.
I haven't seen those figures, but if it is, it would mean that a small amount of migrants contribute disproportionately compared to the large amount of migrants that don't contribute. And so those large amount of migrants are taking up places in schools, taking up places in hospitals, and that's the problem that you need to address. But unfortunately, at the moment, the UK is so addicted to low-skilled labour, and we've got an economy that relies on low-skilled labour, that we haven't done the hard work to actually reorganise the economy post-Brexit. And that's what the hard work that needs to be done over the next coming years, or else this economy will not be able to handle these numbers.
Absolutely fair point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
I mean, but this is going to take 3 decades to undo, because it's taken 3 decades for us to get here.
I hope we're more agile now, because we're seeing a world in which more and more countries are opting for limiting mobility, more protectionist trade policies, and that means having to look more to our own resources, including our domestic labour supply. Now, Labour this week set out, got quite easily overshadowed by assisted dying, their get back to work plans, which included looking at the fact that we have 3 million people in this country who are off work, sick, or in work with a limiting condition. Now, our GDP productivity figures since 2008 have been consistently falling. We're producing GDP per head lower than we were pre-financial crisis. So we're working longer, harder, we're iller, but we're less productive as well.
They're also talking about us doing 4-day weeks and also, giving massive pay rises to union people who aren't having to work certain days.
I'm pro any policy that gets productivity up and spreads that benefit across the country.
Productivity up? Just giving a pay rise to a train driver that doesn't have to work for
we still have
days.
Comparatively high employment rates in this country, and interestingly, the employment rights bill that's going through at the moment is projected to actually loosen the labour market by actually putting some people out of work. And that may not necessarily be a bad thing in terms of the macroeconomics of it. It'd be horrible for the people. But
also, you've just had a budget from Rachel Reeves as well, which is going to put more people out of work, because a lot of employers are saying, well, actually, look, the National Insurance Employers' Contribution rise is going to lead to fewer people being able
I want to
have
see
a job.
Labour grapple immigration by the horns, a full-scale review, not just asylum, but where people are coming in, where they're contributing, where they're going. If people are coming in, why don't we send them to parts of the country that actually maybe need labour, rather than just say concentrating on the southeast of England as well?
We should be training some of the people in those parts of the country. And we're not. I don't hear a lot of that.
But that pool isn't massive, though. The people out of work in this country isn't a massive pool, though, at the moment.
Let's talk about Louise Hay, the Transport Secretary, who seems to have been, ironically, thrown under a bus. Investigated.
Not a nationalised train.
But not a nationalised train. Well, there wouldn't be a driver driving it because they've probably got a day off. It really irritates me. Staff shortage. I mean, how many times do we see a staff shortage? It's a timetable. Did they not know they needed to be there? Anyway, don't start me. So, what do you think about this story? So, if anyone doesn't know this story, it happened in the last couple of days. Louise Hay resigned as Transport Secretary because the Times newspaper revealed that she was convicted of fraud in a police investigation involving a stolen and missing mobile phone. So what happened was that she was the subject of a victim of a mugging in, I think, 2013. She thought that a work mobile had been stolen within that mugging, but then the work mobile turned up. I think she switched it on. The police managed to find that she'd switched it on, so she was called in to the police. A lawyer at the time, she claims, told her to say no comment, which was quite bad advice, and she ended up with the lowest possible punishment from a magistrate as the result of it, and then declared it when she first stood as an MP. However, she has now been forced to resign after it was all exposed. I mean, is this a massive crisis? Is this as big a story as is being claimed? Is there some hypocrisy here because actually Labour knew about it?
Well, look, this underlines, I think, how Starmer behaves in government. He doesn't expend political capital when he doesn't have to. And Louise Haigh...
It's another way of saying he has no principles.
Well, Louise Haig's tenure as former 5-month tenure as Transport Secretary cannot be said to have been an overwhelming success. The Department for Transport got a cut in its resource allocation for the next year spending review. She had the P&O ferries comments as well. She has been spearheading the public ownership of national rail legislation through too, but she has been at odds with Downing Street, and there is speculation that Starmer's cut her loose now ahead of the expected January reshuffle. So the timing seems very convenient to me. And look, she may come back in a more junior role, but I don't think he's going to lose much sleep over the fact she's not there anymore.
Yeah. So do you think that this was the plan to get rid of her anyway, and this is just a convenient...
We have to remember that she was told basically to quit, not by Starmer, but by Morgan McSweeney, who is his chief of staff. Now, when Sue Gray was in, I think soft left cabinet ministers like Rayner, like Haigh, had more cover because Sue Gray built more bridges with them, as it were. Morgan McSweeney, however, is much more pro-right, the party.
That's not the heart of the matter here for me. The heart of the matter is based around two questions. One, did he know? And two, what should happen to Starmer if he did know? Now, I think it's almost certain that he did know that this was the case. And, let me do a Starmer. Let me kind of admit a few items into evidence. Number one, the way that they've framed this is they're saying further details have come to light. By definition, that means that they knew the nub of the story initially.
Some details to start with.
Number two, Westminster talks. It's absolutely absurd to assume that they hadn't heard about this. And number three, the vetting process for senior cabinet positions is extensive. They would have found this out in the vetting process. So I think on balance of probability, Starmer did know. And if he did know, I think he has to resign. He's created this ridiculous standard for himself. He doesn't have values. He doesn't have real strong policy. He doesn't have a vision. So what he relies on is this sort of like moralism, and he's failed that moral test that he set.
I don't... If this was something that she was accused of and like I said, had this punishment for, I have no problem with her becoming a cabinet minister as a result after that happened. The problem I've got is if there was a lie around people knowing. Because there's spent conviction and you can change, and it was not a massive thing, and I don't actually, if we believe what she says, it wasn't, clearly they didn't believe that she was trying to commit a massive fraud. I don't know whether you agree with that, but the problem for me is the lie of Starmer knowing or not knowing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've also heard, though, that we don't know the full story and that actually, A, there may have been a couple of phones involved, and B, this was known in Aviva at the time that this was something that was done. Just say, the phone's been stolen, so I can pick up a new item. And the other thing I would say, and I was speaking to a friend who works in the police force the other day, and they said in their 30 years, they'd never seen anyone being given a criminal record for something which was a genuine mistake. She said it's just very unlikely that if it was a legitimate mistake, the court would not have handled it in that way.
So the police are saying they'd never make a mistake in choosing to prosecute somebody. I find that very hard to believe.
No, that's not what I said. I said if someone has made a legitimate mistake and oversight that they didn't know they had the phone, it wouldn't have been treated as a criminal conviction.
Also, she did plead guilty at a magistrate's court, and I would say that, OK, I understand the logic of pleading guilty to sort of get something gone and spent, but I don't think there would be anything that would ever compel me to plead guilty if I genuinely was not guilty.
Not if I'm about to go stand for Parliament in a month's time.
You only survive as a cabinet minister if the Prime Minister backs you. And we saw this when Dominic Cummings was found to have driven to Barnard Castle. Boris Johnson spent huge amounts of his political capital, which was considerable at the time, because he'd just won the election, he had the goodwill of the COVID pandemic response, to keep him in post, giving him a Downing Street press conference. Starmer, in contrast, ran against that sort of sleaze, and he made this rod for his own back with these ministerial standards. So now ministers have to transgress only a small amount, and it was a transgression according to the rules.
Do they? I'm sorry, but thousands of pounds worth of clothes?
In Starmer's eyes, they do. And look, but this is the problem, at least a double standard.
It sounds like he's a little bit selective, though, because
I'm sure he is.
Didn't he himself not declare a load of clothes for his wife? Didn't Rachel Reeves miscategorise a load of clothes that she was
Angela Rayner didn't declare
given?
them either.
Angela Rayner didn't declare them either. So this high standard that you're talking about didn't really apply to them.
No, because Starmer's prepared to spend the capital to keep those in post.
That he likes.
Rayner and Reeves are far more valuable to Starmer than the Transport Secretary who jeopardises an £8 billion investment from P&O ferries by sounding off about something that happened 2 years ago in relation to their trip to
point. It just goes to show there is such a hollowness to this man. Like, he's created his brand around being moral, around being a rule abider, about being the ex-prosecutor, and we now see that it's just a complete political charade. And the reason why that really hurts is because at least someone like a Boris Johnson, who, you know, kind of was probably...
Well, he never claimed to have any morals.
That's right. And at least he was fun to watch. Whereas there's such a joyless, kind of boring, sad, mediocre element to Starmer that if he also can't even do the straight and narrow thing at the same time, why are you there, mate?
Heidi Alexander has replaced Louise Hay. Now, of course, she's well known to people in London for being one of the deputy mayors, I think, in London.
For transport.
Yeah, I remember she sent a tweet at the time saying, I know absolutely nothing about transport. I'm kind of learning. There's a tweet out there where she actually said that, and I think that obviously the way in which London is run for transport, when you look at some of the what was implemented under her tenure, that sends chills down my spine that she now has the national brief for that.
Well, I mean, she's going to inherit a sticky wicket with, you know, not just the HS2 legislation going through, rail public ownership, the bus reforms Labour wants to pursue as well. She's also going to have a tricky negotiation.
Well, where they're putting up bus prices.
And also a tricky negotiation for the next spending review settlement, which would relate to capital investment as well.
The buses that other people might be more likely to get that are losing their winter fuel payment, and the buses that they want us to catch because of net zero that they're spending billions on.
I hope she's a better advocate for her department than Louise Hay was, because Transport secured a cut in real terms for the next year. Actually, we need to be investing, as you said, in infrastructure, in that kind of investment through capital spending
in HS2,
in getting more local transport projects done as well. And hopefully, Heidi Alexander will use her experience in London to deliver that. So we'll have to wait.
She delivered cycle lanes in London. She delivered cycle lanes. Bus speeds have never been lower in London. They made bus lanes 24 hours in London, and bus speeds have never been lower. So the buses should be flying through at the moment in London, because they're all 24 hour and they've never been slower.
I wonder how she's going to apply this London experience to rural England and the rest of the country.
Well, you know exactly what she'll do. She'll just say, oh, well, you know, you might be 104 years of age, senile and blind, but get on a bicycle. And if you don't, well, then you're stuck at home, like trying to jog on the spot to warm yourself up because you've got no winter fuel payment. Anyway, it's my blood pressure. Listen, thank you. Anything you want to end on that, Will, because you've got the final word?
The only thing I'd say is the little insight there that net zero makes transport policy a huge amount much more difficult, and that goes across pretty much every single cabinet position. We've got to scrap this net zero thing, but maybe that's a separate conversation.